Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to a quick little review I wanted to cover because I just saw a show, technically a few hours after, uh, I'm recording this a few hours after I just saw this show, and I thought I might as well review it because I haven't reviewed a show in a little bit, and it was a solid show and a really cool experience. This was one in Savannah, Georgia, that I always go to this specific venue. This is the Lodge of Sorrows. This is held by Face Records. I have this stamp on my hand right there. Kind of a cool new thing they just did. I prefer it over the wristband, even though I did wash my hands probably like 2 or 3 times since I got it on, and it's still on. So, you know, good ink, I guess I'll say. It's not really relevant. But what I saw tonight was a 3-act little show and a really intimate show, probably the most intimate show I've ever really seen. And there is a sort of difference between the intimacy of like a hidden, unspoken punk show and this show. Because this show, it was a sit-down show, but it was at the Lodge of Sorrows. And the Lodge of Sorrows is a stand-up venue, clearly. It's built for that. It's made for that. So there were like 30 lawn chairs. And they were good lawn chairs. They were the kind with the cup holder in it. So I actually got a water after the second act and I put it in there and I just had it there. And that was actually super cool. But what I did see were 3 different acts and all of various importance. 2 were related to each other. And that was Aaron, the first act, and Nat, aka Sound Alter, for the second act. And we'll get into the third act in just a moment because these first 2 acts I wanted to talk about a little bit. But this won't be too long, I promise. So Aaron, on the first act, is the bassist of a local band that I have spoken about before, the Holy Ghost Tabernacle Choir. And their album actually dropped about a week ago, and it just went on streaming, I believe, the day before filming this. I believe the 19th. I might be wrong about that, but it's been up. I just listened to it, and it is actually a really, really good album. It's kind of grindcore, death grind, screamo, probably combined with there's a good amount of post-hardcore. As a bit of a Fugazi fan myself, I definitely felt a lot of post-hardcore in this stuff, and this is actually all kind of irrelevant because what Aaron played live was very different. Now, this dude is kind of an amazing, amazing artist. He's incredibly talented on the bass guitar, and he was playing this electric 6-string bass guitar, and it had this really nice tone for half of it that actually sounded like a double bass on the lower notes. It had this really resonant, woody sound that felt just beautiful. And the higher notes, they sounded like that sort of glossy, higher note thing that's kind of harmonic sounding, but not quite. And what he played were 5 original compositions, I believe, or 4. I believe it was 4 original compositions, and a Bach song, which was the very famous cello piece that you hear in a whole lot of things. And he ended it with that, which was a really nice touch. But his playing was really interesting. And as someone who plays bass in a band of my own, it was really interesting seeing someone do as much as they could do in one act. And I pretty much every time I rehearse with my band, there's really like one motif a rehearsal that I can just drill into the ground. Maybe it's something industrial sounding, maybe it's some sort of huge slide sound that I just throw a bunch in, or maybe it's tapping, or arpeggios is another big one I've been working with recently. And if you play bass, this sounds completely uninteresting, but every time I nail one of these concepts, I'm probably not going to get another one for the rest of the rehearsal. And just from a base level examination, Aaron got all the best moments of my rehearsals. They were all packed into like 30-second increments of these pieces that Aaron wrote up there. They were very impressive, and every piece he did was just a little bit different from the others. The second piece in particular was really interesting as he had this super long extended tapped rhythm part, which is an awesome thing to do on bass. If you play bass and you haven't tried tapping yet, try tapping with whatever texture you're going with and whatever tone. It's going to sound super sick, and it's especially good if you do it fast because then it fills in together, and that's exactly what Aaron did here. It just was rolling and it just pressed together for this really, really beautiful thing. And there were no pedals added, so it wasn't distorted at all. It was just the straightforward, really gorgeous sound, and I was all for it. There were some slapped parts actually that were rather interesting because you don't really expect slapping from this type of playing. It was like classical leaning basically. There was some classical theory going on here, stuff that I wouldn't really be able to name myself because my classical knowledge and really most of my orchestral piece or traditional, I guess I could say. There's so many terms I could use to describe things that everyone in mainstream would just describe as classical, even though I know that's technically not true. So I find that really hard to describe. But he had theory for days. You know, he was just playing all over the fretboard, and he had some really amazing motifs in every song. He'd have these really beautiful tap sections that he would switch. He'd just go up and down with them. I'm sounding like an idiot right now because I really don't know what I'm talking about because my theory knowledge myself is actually pretty poor. And I mean, I could only see the frets so well from where I was in the audience, but it was a really amazing sound and a really full sound, surprisingly. And the low string on this bass was tuned low enough where every time it was hit, it really just fit square in your ear for something really awesome. This was a really intimate sounding set here, really beautiful. One of the pieces actually was a bass line that Aaron wrote for Holy Ghost Tabernacle Choir, but it was expanded upon in a few different ways. There were a lot of really interesting melodic sections, some really cool, more traditional solo style things that you'd hear in like rock music, but that was really sparingly used. I could go on and on about how much I loved Aaron's set, but if you ever get to see Holy Ghost Tabernacle Choir in your town, go see them because they're a fantastic band. They're even better live than on the album, I actually think, just because that extra space, and especially because Nat goes out in the audience. If Nat's able to. I mean, I don't know what stages allow for what, but it's a total riot. The bass lines are super eclectic and interesting, really awesome stuff. And then on to Sound Alter Set. So this was Nat using their sort of synthesizer skills that are normally cultivated for the Holy Ghost Tabernacle Choir. There are some intermission tracks on that record that have spoken word over the top of it. I believe it's the intro track and the track before Unaware Wolf. Unaware Wolf being one of the best tracks on the album. If you don't have time for a full album, well, this is just a 31-minute album, so go check it out. But also, the last track and the 2 tracks before that are both utterly incredible. But in an album context, they were even better. And live, they were also fantastic as well. So Nat was doing this spoken word thing, and as someone who got 4 hours of sleep last night, I hope my parents aren't seeing that because that's quite terrible, even for my standards. And I hope you guys don't worry about me. That is bad for my standards. You know, I'm not normally like that. But I was exhausted, and this thing was this drone fest of synthesizers. And it was like different drones in these like movements. Like Nat would switch the arpeggiator. The oscillators would just switch just a little bit. The low bass texture would be switched to something else. It was always a rather full sound. It would always be a few textures at once. One normally being like an arpeggio of some sort. And there was almost like a theremin type instrument, which I didn't exactly know what it was, but it was like this rod that Nat was like moving their fingers around, and it looked super, super cool, and it really like manipulated textures in this really subtle way. It was like this more quiet synth that was underneath everything. Really unsettling, really immersive stuff. And then probably after a good like 6 minutes or something, Nat gets on the mic and does spoken word. And as someone who actually just found Michael Gira and Lydia Lunch's poetry collaboration, it's on Rate Your Music, and that's how I found it because it's one of the first things Michael Gira did on his own. I found it very interesting to listen to this. It was a lot more of a deadpan way of speaking that Nat was using for most of it. And if I had more energy, I probably would have loved it, but I was struggling a little bit because I was just so exhausted. But it was really something that you really got to pay attention to absorb. The microphone it did bury the sound just a little bit, but I think it still was pretty immersive. There were topics of abuse, a lot of religious imagery used, and it was really interesting. And Nat's vocals, or vocal timbre, I guess. It's kind of weird because it's a spoken word, so I don't really describe the vocal texture that much. Nat got a little more amped up towards the end, and there was just more energy placed. And that made it have a lot more stakes and a lot more consequence shown in the passages being spoken. And it was really interesting. And I loved how every time Nat stopped talking, the synths would be modified again, and another passage would start once they reached a consistency. And the last act of the night, which was the reason everyone was there, no disrespect to the other acts, Norman Westberg from Swans, the guitarist of Swans, who was there for almost all of the band's career. This dude is a machine, incredible dude, and he looks rather intimidating in the videos of Swans live because he's got this like beard that makes him look kind of rough. But I spoke to him in person before the show. My roommate and we walked up to him and we were talking. And we said hi. I bought a CD off of him, which was pretty cool. Really twee design. It's literally like a plastic little slip case with the album art is like folded, and inside that is like a CD. It's like a cheap vinyl cover kind of, minus the cardboard, except there's the cardboard slip, and it's pretty low fidelity packaging, but it kind of works with the punky nature of it. And it's literally like the album title was on the cardboard piece, and then the track names were on the same piece, and on the inside slip there was like a little message. Super cool stuff. So you're probably thinking, what does Norman Westberg do live? I kind of came into this expecting something Swans, but I was pleasantly surprised that I was wrong. I did bring my earbuds, or my earplugs rather, expecting it to be crazy loud, and it wasn't crazy loud, but it was a very full sound that this man provided. For being such a chill guy off stage, really uplifting set. I was surprised to say. It was very abstract and very weird for sure, but it was really cool because it was actually rather positive. And I'm going to compare it to something that I'm going to talk about in a few months' time at the earliest, for a second time. But Giles Corey's second album, it's only available on Bandcamp, and Giles Corey being the project of Dan Barrett from Have a Nice Life. He made this drone tribal ambient, really interesting experimental record, and the entire point of it is to induce a trance in the listener. And one time I was really trying to focus on my physical appearance. None of you worry about me out there. Something I might say might be a little concerning, but I swear I'm fine. I might occasionally have bouts of like unhealthy tendencies, but it's really all in terms of research. I don't get into bad habits like this. But I did prolonged fasting I attempted it for 2 days straight. I attempted to have no food for 2 days straight. I ended up caving the night after I listened to this record, but after doing that, I remember thinking this would be a good time to listen to this record because it recommends you fast for 24 hours beforehand. And my experience with this album was really interesting because it's got a PDF of about 30 pages accompanying it, and you're supposed to read it before ever digesting the musical aspects of the album. And Dan has gone out on a limb and said that it's not really a music album as much as it is like an experiment or like some sort of process that's meant to induce trance, because that's what it does. It uses binaural beats, which in a normal context would be rather cheap of an artist to use, but I think the way Dan uses it is really sparing and really interesting. And reviewing it like a normal music record is really weird because the pacing is all over the place. It's insanely slow. The last track is over a half hour long, so it's really hard to describe it properly. And that album is very negative sounding. It's supposed to sort of make you understand death in a really weird abyssal context, and it kind of does that. If you do it properly, you will see things when your eyes are closed. You're gonna have some trance-like effect, and it's a really, really interesting record that I kind of recommend everyone try out at least once. It is only on Bandcamp because it's supposed to be like this thing that you like listen all the way through with headphones in your room alone. It's not meant to be like any other sound coming through. Noise canceling headphones are even preferred. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because one, it's a highly fantastic band with a side project that is kind of insane. Norman Westberg, he made his live performance was so similar to the effects of Deconstructionist by Giles Corey. And I found this very interesting because I didn't expect that. Swans does have a very visceral, emotional sort of reaction that is garnered by their music. Jira on the mic, especially for To Be Kind, he's just wretched, like belting the whole time. It's like the most unholy yells I've heard on a record that isn't like harsh vocals yet. Really visceral, emotional stuff. And of course, you get the Glowing Man, where all that emotion is packed into the drone, fast-paced instrumental. And that's an oxymoron, but if you hear Glowing Man, you'll probably understand. So, really interesting effects, of course, brought by the guitar work of Norman Westberg. You know, he's a fantastic player. But what he did in this show was a new artistic rendition of pretty much, in my opinion, what he's been able to do for all these years to really create such a unique soundscape and something really interesting. He did not play as intimate of a set as Aaron did. I can compare the two because they're both one instrument and one instrument alone. Aaron had the no effects, very straightforward, nothing but skill up there and compositional prowess, because those were some beautiful pieces. Meanwhile, Norman, he had a massive pedal stack, so many different pedals, and a sample pad, and just a whole mess of things. And I brought up Deconstructionist because his set, as far as I could tell, was trance-inducing for me. I do believe I fell into a trance because I was seeing things with my eyes closed. And the first thing he did was he went up on stage probably 5 minutes after Nat. Nat went up probably like 15 minutes after Aaron, you know, a very appropriate break. Really good amount of time to go to the bathroom, go grab water or whatever you needed. And that was well needed. But Norman, he gets up on stage, he goes, okay, I'm gonna get started now. So sit back, close your eyes. And then I don't remember all the things he said there, but that's pretty much what he said. So I had my eyes closed the whole time, so I really couldn't see what was going on. But he comes out with this huge synthesized bass sound that is pounding so hard that I hear like the metal shaking in the building. But it's actually not that loud. You know, you expect Swans to be insanely loud because Swans are insanely loud. But Norman Westberg, this material is just loud enough to sit very comfortably in your ear, and it really, you feel it like fill up the space in your ear in the most perfect way. I'm not going to say it is the most beautiful sound ever, but it's a really transcendental sound. It's abstract. It's weird. It's super interesting. And he proceeds to play this really minimalist set. And we were talking before the show about genre tags, and I'm pretty much mentioned how Rate Your Music loves to give these things all these tags, and now they're have these ridiculous genre tags that have like no more than 50 releases in history. And Norm was just like, yeah, I have no idea what I am. I just make music up there. And I guess you could refer to it as drone. I guess you could refer to it as ambient, but it's kind of too busy to be drone. It's kind of too upfront to be ambient. It's just like abstract. It's abstract impressionism in audio form, you know? It's really like how you fill in the gaps with the sound and generate it through your brain. And while your eyes are closed, it's kind of what you see there. And one of the reasons I did think this was like trance-inducing was I thought they turned the lights on because I was seeing all this bright pink. And only other time I ever saw anything with my eyes closed in such vivid detail was when I listened to Deconstructionist about 6 months ago at this point. So I thought that was super interesting. He droned for about a half hour, maybe longer. Genuinely, I couldn't tell you, but he just kept going and going, and he was adding these really interesting little guitar embellishments, and it really low amount of melody. The harmony was there because there was just this massive layer of samples. And there was like, I thought he hopped on the drums for a point, but I guess he just pressed a sample bit. And the samples, they were never off-putting. They never felt too jarring, and they never like sunk you in too much. Another reason why I think this is trance-inducing, I thought I was going to fall out of my chair like the whole time. Whenever I was paying attention enough, I felt like I was going to fall backwards and go hit my head. I was confused on where I was on a few occasions, which is something that'll happen in these trance-inducing records, of which, again, I only know Deconstructionist and this live performance that I just saw. Gosh, really, what else is there to say about this other than it was a really unique, transcendental experience, super interesting. I really recommend you guys go see this this wonderful man live because one, he's a sweet guy. Two, he makes some killer music. And gosh, one of my favorite parts was the sample he played at the end of all this vocal chatter, and it was such an atmospheric lift that you're listening to it, and the voices come in, and it almost feels like you're being woken up and taken somewhere else, and it's so weird and confusing. And the weirdest thing was he was quieting everything down there at a decent pace. You know, we were all able to kind of notice it was about to stop. And then opening my eyes and everyone started clapping. And I was like, what the heck did I just go through? Like, I feel like I'm not supposed to clap at all. I feel like I'm supposed to like sit there and think for another minute or two or five even, because the thing just shook me up. I literally opened my eyes and it felt like I was driving all night, but in the best way possible. Really interesting experience. Apparently he's still touring a little bit. I remember at one point I asked him, I'm like, what are you doing in Savannah? And he was like, everyone's like asking me like why I'm in like places. I'm just on tour. And he said that like Florida mentioned something like that. I mean, Florida's got more going on than Savannah. That's for darn sure. But I highly recommend you guys go see him. Super cool experience. Same type of stress relief you get easily from like your average hardcore show, honestly. But a very fulfilling way to do it. And that's about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little review. It went on a little longer than I thought it would, but hope you guys are doing well out there. Description below has all my social media, you know, comments, questions, or concerns. You know, I do check all my comments, like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And that's about it. Have a good day. Bye.